All right, so we're going to be talking about evangelism, definitions, and metrics. Okay, we'll do that. All right, and these are my co-authors. So I'm Tara Hargrove. I'm from Pacific Union College, and I'm working with Linda Crumley at Walla, Peter, who you also know from Andrews, and René, who you know, I assume. So some of the background here for this study is evangelism stands as a cornerstone of the Christian faith. Definitions vary, but center on communicating good news, right? So database metrics can help in understanding the phenomena accompanying evangelism. So this study fills a knowledge gap by describing how Adventist leaders define and measure evangelistic efforts. So what we did is we interviewed 10 leaders representing conferences, unions, and evangelistic ministries across the NAD. Interviews were conducted in person and via Zoom. We audio recorded and transcribed verbatim. Thematic analysis was used using the constant comparative method and in vivo and AI-assisted theme exploration, and all names are pseudonyms, of course. So this presentation comes from the same interview project that we presented here last year, 2025. So last year's analysis focused on successful and unsuccessful evangelistic efforts or approaches. Today's analysis focuses on a different question: how leaders define evangelism and how they determine whether evangelistic efforts are successful. So how do they measure that? So our research questions for this analysis: what is the definition of evangelism in the NAD? Are there notable differences in the definitions by individual evangelists and the conferences, unions for whom they work? And then 3, how is the effectiveness of evangelism being measured beyond the traditional number of baptisms? So looking at our first research question, what is the definition of evangelism in the NAD? So findings overall, we found that church leaders define evangelism as the intentional sharing of the gospel and building of relationships that lead others to Christ. So both proclamation and relationship building. When asked about an official conference or union definition of evangelism, most participants agreed that there was no formal definition, or they did not know where it was. So Ryan says, I don't believe we have an official definition, which we found interesting. Keith said it's implied, but not, I don't think we've written it down as a definition per se. So research question 2, are there notable differences in the definitions by individual evangelists and the conferences or unions for whom they work? So here's some example definitions from the data. Obviously, we have lots of quotes. We're just going to cover a few to stay within time here. Julian said, evangelism is the art of sharing Jesus with people around us through different ways into open doors so we can reach out to them and do what Jesus did. Jaden said, evangelism is reaching people with the gospel of Jesus Christ so that they surrender themselves to Christ, sharing with people the good news of salvation in Christ, inviting them to accept him and let Jesus take control of their lives. So while some participants focused on traditional approaches like these, their definitions tend to emphasize proclamation, invitation, and helping people make a decision to follow Christ. Other participants emphasized a more relational understanding of evangelism, describing it as a way of life rather than specific events. So Paul says, evangelism is not just an event, but a lifestyle. Discipleship, walking alongside people, is central. Evangelism is about relationships. I feel very strongly about discipleship and that many people who are evangelized come from someone investing in them. Very much like what Jesus modeled. Ryan says, intentionally loving people, in sharing with them and serving not only their physical needs, but also introducing them to the spiritual reality and meeting their spiritual needs and walking with them through a process into a journey with Jesus. So these definitions reflected an increased focus on discipleship, emotional connection, friendship, and long-term engagement. However, despite these different emphases, participants demonstrated remarkable consistency in their overall understanding of evangelism. Whether they focused on proclamation or relationships, leaders generally described evangelism as sharing the gospel and helping people develop meaningful connection with Christ and his community. What we found was not a disagreement about evangelism, but a difference in emphasis. So participants consistently viewed evangelism as both sharing the gospel and building relationships, even when they placed greater emphasis on one aspect or the other. So how is the effectiveness of evangelism being measured beyond the traditional number of baptisms? That was our third research question. Some of our findings, measures of church effectiveness. So before we examine how evangelistic effectiveness is assessed, it's helpful to consider how church effectiveness is typically measured. So Keith says, when I was a conference president, I would track each church in the conference, and the metrics we would track were simple, basic ones: tithe, baptism, membership, and attendance. The participants often reference familiar indicators such as tithe, baptisms, membership, and attendance. Because these measures are easily counted and reported, some have also been used to evaluate evangelistic success. So same way of measuring as church success. So measures of evangelistic effectiveness. Baptism is still predominant. Attendance, relationships, plans with measurable outcomes. So these are the four primary ways that evangelistic effectiveness is measured and assessed. While baptisms are dominant, many leaders described a growing interest in broader indicators of long-term impact. So each of these are going to be discussed. First, we'll review the most popular and obvious measure of evangelistic effectiveness, which is the number of baptisms. So Torah says, when people are joining the church, when they're added to the church, according to the book of Acts, when people are getting baptized, that's really successful. Because baptism isn't just a number, it's showing that here are people that are surrendering themselves to the Lord that wants to be part of his kingdom. Malcolm says we typically have looked at evangelism as reaping, helping people to come to a decision to follow Jesus, which baptism would happen after that. And then baptism is synonymous with joining the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So baptism seems like an excellent measure of effective evangelism, but there's a quote-unquote dark side. Participants recognize that an overemphasis on baptizing people can result in a lack of retention. And so Jordan said, we are addicted to baptismal numbers. We love that, and it's understandable, but our entire system is driven on baptism, and it becomes baptisms at all costs, with the result of losing 40% of new members. And that's just unacceptable. I don't know where he got that statistic. Paul says we tend to look to just numbers. We haven't fine-tuned it yet, but what I wish we would do more of is not just the baptisms, but retention. We need to ask, are they still in the church X number of years later? To me, that's something we can do a better job of. So seasoned evangelists note that creating a healthy church culture needs to take priority over high baptismal numbers. So the conference president puts it this way, Julian says. He says, I don't care for numbers, I care for healthy churches. He aims to develop a different culture of health where the goal is not to have someone dunked and then forgotten, his words, but to create a culture in the local church where those who are coming are assimilated into the family and they belong and they're part of it, and it's working wonders. Part of becoming assimilated into the church is attendance, which is another strong indicator of evangelistic success. So Keith says, and to me, the most valuable metric for knowing whether we're being successful or not is attendance, because you can baptize somebody and never see them again. Attendance is the most important metric to me, looking for a trend. Are we going up in attendance? Are we going down? Why? It's the questions that validate the process. Adrian says, purpose is to bring them to the church, right? So obviously attendance is an important factor in measuring them. Jordan says attendance is the big indicator of whether a church is growing or not, really. So attendance only grows if people want to relate with each other. Personal friendships are a vital part of evangelism, especially in the early stages of an evangelistic plan. Creating connections and valuing the people God puts in our lives is the difference between successful evangelism and failure. So Ryan says what we're looking for is church life. I mean, community, where people are engaged in people's lives, and it's much more meaningful. Oh, Keith said that. Ryan says, after you've been an Adventist for so long, you no longer have any non-Adventist friends. You know, that's your experience too. And so one of the things we're doing is we're just trying to help our members and teach them and empower them to make friends with non-Adventists. And it seems simple and silly, but we can't witness to people that we don't have a relationship with. Paul says, we discovered that evangelism is more effective when someone invites someone else. Letting God lead you into relationships can hopefully translate into people wanting to know more about Jesus and our faith. Sometimes church members feel awkward when trying to initiate friendships. So as we think about relationships, different cultural backgrounds make a significant difference in how people may think about church and the importance of, or not, of forming and nurturing friendships. And this affects their success during evangelistic meetings. So reaching with relationships, Malcolm says the greatest success that we're having as far as reaching people is through relationships. Torres says there needs to be some training on how people interact with new people. That's huge. Jordan says it really comes down to the personal responsibility of every church member to be pouring themselves into other people on a personal one-to-one basis. That means they get more than a happy Sabbath when they come around. So notice some cultural patterns. So Adrian says Hispanic people, they need community. So when they're invited, they come. Even non-Adventists attend church. Julian says the Hispanic churches, they're self-propelled when it comes to evangelism. So these are the cultural differences that you notice. And Jordan said public evangelism works for Hispanics because they are a group. They're very community-oriented. They invite their friends. And so these were the cultural patterns that showed up. Intentional plans for evangelism. Paul talked about having a plan and the ideas that the church can support, make sure that the church supports those ideas. And Jordan talks about, we're actually asking them, tell us what you expect the outcome to be. So having an intentionality of making a goal and then evaluating it, so kind of having that cyclical process to evangelism is really important. So more data ahead. So we have lots of data. Ronald says, I would like to see some research on styles of evangelism because facts are our friends and data matters. That's why we're here, right? That's what this conference is about. So just some conclusions here. There's no set definitions of evangelism, but church leaders hold common ideas. Success is measured by a lot of different things that span the evangelism arc, pre, during, and post. Successful evangelism is rooted in friendships, and cultural relevance is critical to success. So we had a number of recommendations here as well. So René said we love recommendations at this conference, right? So these are some of our recommendations to broaden the definition of evangelism, to develop comprehensive evaluation metrics, to empower local churches to provide more training about that relational type of things, invest in long-term community engagement, so to expand that pre, during, and post-evangelism activities, and then enhance collaboration and innovation. So foster that synergy between the church, local churches, conferences, and the union by sharing best practices and data like we have here. So that's all. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Quick switch. Thank you. We're all discussing the same data. It was first from the Asian, South Pacific Asian division. You were actually, no, you were using different set of data. Now I'm coming back to the Global Church Member Survey that you already heard. We, with René and I, have been involved with some other researchers as well in researching pastoral well-being. And so we thought, let's look at the data as they share about pastors. And so we ran across the topic that we put together, perceptions of pastoral care, discipleship training, and satisfaction among the church members from the global sample. And this is information that you have already seen in some other was that me? No. Some other presentations, and so I'm not going to read it. The data were collected between 2022-23, yes, various divisions. Okay. So the questions: what is the relationship between pastoral visitation and church members' perception of pastoral care? How is nurture and discipleship training associated with members' satisfaction with their local church? And to what extent do pastoral care and discipleship effort jointly predict overall church member satisfaction within global context? So you can imagine that in the global church, though we will have the same fundamental beliefs, the practices are different. And pastoral visitation is one specific issue that is very contrasting and different in different contexts. And we could talk just about that, but I'm just mentioning it because the focus is somewhere else. But you can understand that visitation is life and death matter in some contexts, and pastors do basically very few things other than visiting people. And in other contexts, like for example, in North America, visitation is not really something that pastors are involved with. And I don't know if it is cultural or if it is whatever else, but it's interesting. And in that sense, it's interesting to see the global data, not just the North American. So we were looking at 4 questions here. Pastors caring. My pastor cares about me. From strongly agree to strongly disagree. Other people in my church care about me. Strongly agree to strongly disagree. My local church offers training on nurture and discipling of church members. Again, the same scale. And then how satisfied are you with your local church? The same scale. So here are the frequencies. My pastor cares about me. 76%, 3 out of 4. Agree or strongly agree, yes, my pastor cares about me. Other people in my church care about me. We have 79, over 79% agree and strongly agree. And then 1 in 4 of the respondents feel like, yeah, people don't really care about me. And that's the same how they feel about pastoral care. And then my local church offers training on nurture and discipling of church members. About the same, no, less, 67% agree and strongly agree that, yes, in our church we have a training how to nurture and disciple church members. How satisfied then are you with your local church? And we added this because there was an interesting correlation. So we would not normally connect the questions with this one, but as the data show, there is a link. So we have 72% are satisfied and very satisfied, and the rest less than that. Here's the correlation analysis. Look, there is though one question that we did not show in the frequency. Received a visit from my pastor, and then there is a frequency, and that actually correlates with my pastor cares about me, 0.255. My local church offers training on nurture and discipling of church members, 0.194. And then how satisfied are you with your local church, 0.122. Then the correlation is The highest correlation actually is between my pastor cares about me and my local church on nurture and discipling of church members. That's interesting. And then there is the last one. My local church offers training on nurture and discipling of church members, and how satisfied are you with your local church? And that's 0.297. We have cross-tabulated some of the questions. Pastoral care and pastor's visit. And you can see here that there are people who are agreeing that pastor cares, and yet they did not have his visit only once or twice. But then you see that there is quite a high percentage of those who are visited every week and they feel that they are cared for. So that makes sense. The next cross-tabulation is on satisfaction with the local church and nurture and discipleship training. You saw that there was some correlation the previous slide. So here is the cross-tabulation showing that on one end, those who strongly disagree that there is a nurture and discipleship training, 18% of those are also very dissatisfied with their local church. And on the other end of the spectrum, there is 33.9% of those who strongly agree that there is a nurture and discipling training in their church, and they are also very satisfied with the church. And here it is that the same? No, it's not. This is actually combining satisfaction with the local church and pastor's caring. And you see that while 16.6% of the respondents strongly disagree that they are satisfied with the church, and they are also very dissatisfied with pastor's caring. Well, I should have stated it differently, but it's still 16.6. And on the other end, 57.4%, right here, we have people who are very satisfied in the church, and they strongly agree that the pastor is caring. So, and that's the practical conclusion or findings. Pastoral visitation is positively related to members' perception that their pastor cares about them, which kind of makes sense. But then nurture and discipleship training are positively related to the satisfaction with the local church, more than being just visited by a pastor, right? Members appear to be more satisfied when they feel personally cared for and when they believe their church is helping people grow as disciples. And then, of course, I mentioned already, divisions across the globe varied in their experience of pastoral visitation, member satisfaction, and discipleship training. Somewhere in this data, what I found was that it's really what nurtures people is relationships rather than just duty of ministry. They have visited, check, done. No, there is more. And so, in the conclusions, satisfied church members are more likely to experience both personal care and intentional discipleship. Pastoral visitation is associated with stronger perception that the pastor cares, and nurture and discipleship training are associated with higher satisfaction with the local church. To sum it up, healthy churches need both caring relationships and intentional disciple making. Programs matter, but they are most meaningful when they are embedded in a relationally caring church community. And that's a topic that we will still address on Saturday, the whole morning. We will discuss healthy churches and what really makes difference